sexy intro as well.
Yeah, the sexy intro is here. We're live. Let's go.
All right, everybody, welcome to Indexer Office Hours number 30. Thank you very much to Payne for running them for the last couple of weeks while I've been on vacation. I heard that they've gone well. We're just going to dive straight in. I don't have much in the way of an agenda. And we're already, prior to recording, we already kicked things off to talk a little bit about stake centralization. So Seb, you want to go ahead and kick that off again?
Yeah, you said that running 1,000 ETH2 validators on one server is not exactly decentralization, but it really depends on if you own 32,000 ETH to run those validators on your machine. And one thing that ETH got particularly right was I think that proof of work is a good mechanism to decentralize stake because miners, they have to pay electricity, they have to sell all the coins, like a good chunk of them. So that either you took a lot of money in your hands, or I think it's pretty distributed over the years. It's not like a proof of stake network where a bunch of people get like 40% of the stake because they did some seed investment or something.
So you're talking about like the credibility of the distribution there, right? Which is one component of decentralization.
Yeah, and like one main features of proof of work, actually. I don't think that proof of work is a viable option for the future, but the networks that started out as proof of work, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they distributed the coins that can go to proof of stake sufficiently, like compared to any other network I know.
I think we can say that Bitcoin is too decentralized because a lot of miners in China and a lot of voting power inside of small amount of people, despite of proof of work.
Yeah, you are talking about the hashing power, which concentrates in China, but who buys the coins from the miners? They cannot keep them. They have to pay electricity, so they're basically having only little coins in stock, actually.
It was interesting to see that on the topic of miners and coins that they hold, that miner coin hodling, so to speak, on Ethereum is at an all-time high right now, as I guess miners are starting to get ready to swap out their proof of work rewards with proof of stake rewards on the ETH2 side once we get there.
I think miners always turned into, like venture capital funds. They invested in all kind of shit with their proceeds. But also, did you see that MetaMask always gives like 1 way priority fee on top of the base fee since this EIP 1559? So in a way, miners should get very, very little transaction fees right now. Almost everything gets burned.
Well, where are we at with the burn?
A lot.
We were deflationary for a period of time there, right?
I think there was a full day of deflation. But yeah, I don't want to kind of get too far off track in terms of decentralization. The Bitcoin point is interesting. I think totally agree that proof of work prior to the kind of industrialization and things like ASICs was a really good way to broadly distribute stake in the network. It's been interesting to see how for Bitcoin, where really GPU mining is no longer viable, proof of work has almost become a centralization vector. And thankfully, I think ETH mining is still largely dominated by GPUs and not so much ASICs. Yeah, but I think the graph and stake decentralization for us is subject to well, certainly a different initial distribution, and as many have commented, proof of stake and the nature of compounding returns is particularly tricky in terms of stake centralization and the acceleration of stake centralization, particularly when that initial distribution was not very broad, or in other words, doesn't have a very good Gini coefficient.
Yeah, so I think steering the conversation again to stake decentralization on the graph. The theme when I'm having these conversations with people is always about, like, I'm always looking to Ethereum, right? I'm always looking to Ethereum and credible neutrality. And there's been some events over the last few weeks, I guess, on various different networks where credible neutrality for certain new L2s has been put into question, for example. People really care about this stuff. They really, really do care about this stuff. And I think in order to sort of cement a protocol's future for decades to come, then the top priority really is the credible neutrality piece. And the conversation we're having now, they're not easy conversations, right? They're difficult conversations. Are the right conversations to be having at this sort of early stage in the network, so we can try and steer decentralization in the right way. And there's two sides to that coin, right? There is the possibility of pushing it too far, and there's the possibility of not pushing it far enough. So it's really important to have these difficult conversations with all the stakeholders. And move ourselves along the scale of credible neutrality in the right direction that has people paying attention to the graph as a credibly neutral platform.
Yeah, I can kind of weigh in on that a little bit too. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, hi guys. This is my first office hours, so I'm happy to be here.
Welcome.
Hi. So one of the things that got me so interested in helping contribute to this part of the network was, primarily around wanting to start up my own indexer and realizing not just the startup capital which would be needed, which I think we can all agree is kind of a necessity, but if we can minimize that would be great. But more so in helping recognize that a rising tide raises all ships, and so it's not necessarily about necessarily redistributing stake in any one way, at the expense of larger indexers, but really making sure that we can do it in such a way that would make smaller indexers at least profitable enough to run their own operations and not be necessarily outcompeted, dramatically by the larger indexers. And that was one of the things that underpinned the proposal that I made on the forum, which I wasn't privy to the conversation an hour ago regarding that. So I don't know if that was talked about specifically, but like you said, kind of fair distribution. I think it's important that we all consider avenues that don't penalize one party over another just for the sake of decentralization.
Absolutely. It works both ways, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's your background, 𝗨𝗀𝗧? Were you working elsewhere in the space? What do you do?
I'm actually just a general software engineer, Web 2. I just found the graph pretty much by random, and around launch of mainnet, which I think was December, kind of kept up with the project a little bit and worked on immersing myself inside of that, inside the space. And so I've been a subgraph developer, almost everything except for an indexer, which has been kind of working up to that 100K minimum. And then once I hit the 100K minimum, or a little more than that, I reached out to 𝗨𝘀 to help get me set up with an indexing setup, and putting kind of down a cost-benefit analysis and realizing that it would be potentially possible, but extraordinarily difficult to get that done, but not impossible. And that's, like I mentioned, kind of what helped me get on the road to this kind of setup. I'm not, an operation with a huge amount of capital. I'm just a guy who I would consider to be pretty technical. So yeah, that's pretty much my background.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the community. It's always encouraging to hear of new people coming in and looking at the possibility of setting up an indexer business. That's what we need, is more engaged indexers.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if maybe I have one thing I want to bring up, just a minor thing. Maybe I want to leave it to Cohen. If you can talk about this a bit, the issues around Open Ethereum and peering. I wanted to cover that to see if we get more awareness around this issue.
Yeah, so they released RC8, and it's not flagged as a pre-release, but it's flagged as an actual release. I installed it yesterday, and I see still the same kind of low peering stuff happening. Yeah, I don't know if it's solved. I saw a lot of emails coming in on the issue that I opened, but I haven't been able to read it. So yeah, I installed the latest RC8, but it looks like it might not be a solve either. But yeah, it's been a lot of meetings and a lot of checking the state of things, and I haven't been able to go back to my Open Ethereum servers to see if I can fix it, if it has been gotten better in the meantime or anything.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem as well, because I've been reading through the comments from yesterday. Like, I think I caught up yesterday, and even people who are setting static peers with their own other nodes, Geth nodes or whatever, those connections are dropping. It's been causing me an absolute nightmare. Having to sort of be on my vacation, but also like babying my indexer because the peer counts are just dropping to nothing at seemingly random times. The only sort of mitigating solution I found, and I mean, I don't know that it will really work for everyone, but I just closed down the natting for the P2P port for my Open Ethereum nodes. And what they do is they seem to just hover around about 10 peers, which is far from ideal, but they tend to work and they seem to stay at the chain head. So until that problem is fixed, if you have your P2P ports open for your nodes, you could consider closing them, and they'll stick around about 10 peers. In my experience, I have 3 OE nodes on various different internet connections, and they're all behaving in that same manner. They're all sticking around 10 peers. Okay, let me have a look in office hours chat. Do we want to talk about Jazz put some POI mismatches into the office hours chat? I don't know if we really want to get into that on Index or office hours. Is Aragon meeting this week? Or is it next week?
Next week.
Oh, okay.
On that topic, I know that many of us are running in Aragon in production. Certainly more than have been vocal about it. I've been running Aragon for a while now, and particularly in the days surrounding the Geth consensus bug that happened, I experienced some strange behavior from the indexing operation, or at least subgraphs that were pointed at nodes backed by Aragon. Practically, that has manifested as call reversions, just on random methods that the graph node is reporting as deterministic failures. That's not the case. So these errors can be retried and will succeed. I have scanned the network and like pinged many of your status endpoints, and I'm seeing that a lot of indexes have failed subgraphs with errors that look suspiciously like the errors that I saw from Aragon. So if anybody is running Aragon, I'd encourage you first of all to have a look at your subgraph health. If you see issues, then please come chat in the Aragon channel. They should be fairly trivial to resolve, but I think most importantly, as indexes adopting Aragon, we need to work together to iron out these edge cases, particularly as Open Ethereum comes to deprecation in a few months' time.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we don't get complacent here, guys. So, if you're seeing issues, then, be vocal about it. Don't assume that somebody else is going to fix the problem for you. Yeah, and make sure you're contributing to the Aragon call as well if you've decided to go down that route on mainnet.
One question is, you mentioned an Aragon call. Is there, I know I saw the Aragon channel, but I'm wondering, is there like a weekly call or something like that as well?
There is a bi-weekly call, as in once every 2 weeks, but strangely, we have another case of the mystery missing invites in the graph calendar, because I don't see that in the calendar right now, and I know we've had invites go missing.
Up to that, Chris, it's even, at least for me, at info, this very meeting is currently not added to the calendar as well, and it got missing.
Yeah, not sure what's happening.
Anyway, it will be at the same time as Indexer office hours on Thursday next week. But please, you know, if you have any questions about running Aragon, even if you don't have problems, please come to the Aragon channel, and you know there are many of us that are happy to help.
Okay, so I'm just picking up on questions here, or topics for discussion. Konstantin has a discussion topic here around 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗧𝗧's idea from the Indexers chat, I guess yesterday or the day before, around a rewards hard cap of maybe 25% to each subgraph per indexer. So Konstantin, Slim, both of you, do you want to have a discussion about this? Maybe introduce the idea?
Yeah, sure. What was the basis of the discussion was that we need to encourage a protocol that is decentralized on a subgraph or on a per subgraph level. So no central point of failure, naturally load balanced, geo-distributed service and censorship resistance. And as it is currently, one large indexer can squat on a subgraph with a large allocation and basically deny other indexers from receiving good rewards from indexing that subgraph. So I propose two different ways of handling that. One is to have a max delegation cap on each subgraph. And one of the reasons behind that is that to encourage large indexers to also provide a level of service to the protocol that is proportional to their stake. So a large indexer would have to index multiple subgraphs and multiple networks, while smaller indexers can focus and specialize on a smaller subset of subgraphs. So one network, for example. And another suggestion I had was to have a maximum of, say, 25% of the indexing rewards can go to one indexer on a subgraph. That would ensure that at least 4 indexers index any subgraph at any particular point.
I think this is a very interesting idea. Both concepts are very interesting. I think we have a problem right now whereby I know we don't have, you know, profound amounts of query business on the network right now, but at some point we'll have, you know, we'll need to be serving a significant level of business. And if there's no incentives for indexers to be thinking about that now, planning for that now, investing for that now, and making sure that there's, you know, their infrastructure is not just able to sit there and take indexer rewards, but can also serve queries in a performant manner. You know, we may have a shortfall if we don't address that now. So the incentives are more aligned towards building up your infrastructure so that it's capable of serving the business that we're, you know, expecting at some point.
If I can add kind of one piece of color around like a network dynamic that we've observed is the kind of distribution of allocations by indexers in the network seems to, you know, essentially target like an equilibrium of yield across all subgraphs. And you know, that's what you'd expect, right? Like people come in and allocate to under-allocated subgraphs and effectively like, you know, normalize the distribution of yield. And one problem that we've seen is, you know, you might have a subgraph receive a large amount of new signal, creating a disproportionate rewards opportunity. And rather than a diverse and broad set of indexers coming in to serve that, you can have one indexer come in with a large amount of stake and effectively saturate that subgraph, and bring the allocation yield effectively down to that equilibrium. And so something that's really interesting about 𝗨𝘀𝗧𝗧's idea is that this would really prevent that behavior and would force a diverse set of indexes to come in and allocate to that subgraph in order to push the yield down to network equilibrium.
I think network equilibrium is not a bad point here, and at least not a worse point, because if you have some new subgraph with a lot of signals, or maybe just new signals on the old subgraphs, if someone just reallocate their tokens, and it will be like some kind of large indexer who will be reallocated and equal, and will make profitability equal for this new subgraph or maybe all other subgraphs. It doesn't bad for the network actually. Yes, like all indexers that will be more active will be not awarded for it if we compare it with non-active indexers who just sitting on some all subgraphs without any actions. But in the same time, all queries served, everybody will get the same amount of GRTs from their work, and you have more rooms for better serving queries, for more strategy, lead to query weighted strategy, some kind of. Why is it bad for the network?
I don't think I quite picked up your point on what exactly is bad for the network.
Yeah, my point is, if some large indexers, for example, as we work right now, we can find that some indexer, some subgraph has additional signals, and we can increase proportion for all other subgraphs if we will rearrange some delegations to this new subgraph. So all network participants will get more revenue in this case. And what is the bad behavior here?
So you mean because you take the allocations away from all other subgraphs that you allocated to direct it to the new subgraph, or everyone who indexes those other subgraphs that you take allocations away from makes more money now? Yeah, actually, I think that's not bad for everyone, but I see the point that it's better to have like 4, 5, 6 indexers on a new subgraph to get it started than instead of 1 or 2. Maybe 1 or 2 are not even serving queries because not everyone is doing this. So chances are better for the users of the subgraph that they have a functioning service.
Yeah, to clarify that it was not in regards to indexing rewards that I thought this was better, but in regards to serving queries in a decentralized network. And say that you have a subgraph with 4 or 5 indexers, 2 or 3 of them might not even serve queries or have a very unoptimized setup, and the other 2 might be located in the same area, so both of them are in the States, for example. If that subgraph developer wants to increase the curation shares on that subgraph to try to entice new indexers to allocate the stake and to serve queries on that subgraph, there's no way to guarantee that will happen. Most likely, some of the indexers that already have that subgraph fully synced will just increase their allocation on that subgraph.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Can folks hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now, Brandon.
Yeah, so I think 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗧𝗧 made a really good point, which is that indexers are heterogeneous, and you do want some diversity there just in terms of quality of performance and service. So we saw this with the synthetic subgraph a few weeks ago, where the existing indexers on the subgraph were about 5% behind the chain head. And so the fact that they were sort of quicker to bring the yield on the synthetic subgraph to equilibrium meant that other indexers that maybe had diverse characteristics, such as being, caught up to the chain head, didn't have the incentive to come in. And you can imagine that playing out across a whole bunch of, quality metrics, right? So data freshness might be one of them. Geographic distribution could be another one. And you could probably come up with a much longer list. But the other component here is the security model of the graph kind of assumes that multiple distinct indexers are indexing the same subgraph, because the indexer agent today is set up to do POI cross-checking. And so if there's only a single indexer indexing a subgraph, then there's basically no one, watching the watchers. There's no other indexers that would, submit disputes against a malicious indexer. And so from that perspective, you also want, some decentralization at the subgraph level.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I was just reading your post on the forum about that, Brandon, that you posted, and I feel like if you wanted to incentivize that, I like Slim's idea, the first part of it at least. I'm not sure about the 25% rewards cap, but someone mentioned that we shouldn't really be basing this only around rewards, and I feel like if you were going to go along with something like you just said, you would want to somehow maybe tie rewards to queries served, perhaps, because you want to incentivize indexers doing their job, and indexing and just preparing that data is only the first step to that job. What you actually want to reward is serving data, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think two of the really, really hard constraints that we had when we were designing the protocol with respect to this conversation was, one, the inability to sort of deterministically assess whether an indexer is serving queries, in a way that's sort of objective, right? Because these queries are happening between two participants off-chain, and all the state changes associated with that is being rolled up in a state channel. So there's nothing that's visible to the on-chain protocol that's aware of whether an indexer is, for example, serving real queries or just spoofing query volume to themselves, which makes it really hard to design mechanisms that aren't gameable, that try and take that as an input. And then the other thing that limits us is the lack of a really strong identity primitive in crypto, and that's something that a lot of projects are working on and have made strides in, but we still don't have anything that's really rock solid, which means that anytime you try and create a mechanism that's geared towards, let's say, having more rewards when there's more unique identities, for example, participating in subgraph indexing, all you're doing is really creating an incentive for spinning up new Sybil identities, and that's going to change protocol behavior in different ways, but it's not necessarily going to have the outcome that we want, which is to have truly unique, indexers indexing a subgraph, not just different Ethereum addresses.
Joseph, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so when we said that there's a new subgraph, let's say, and there's an increase of curation on that subgraph, and then some large indexer jump on the subgraph and they reduce the profitability to equilibrium. So in that case, we are talking about indexing rewards equilibrium, and then we're using the kind of notion of equilibrium to actually implicate some decisions on the query side, fees side. So this is why it's getting a little bit confusing, I think, because if a subgraph has more profitability for a certain period and large indexer jumped on it, from an indexing rewards, it's kind of the same for small indexers to have increased profitability on other subgraphs. But for query fees, it's true that it's not the best. But we're using the indexing equilibrium to compare query fees, which cannot right now because we don't have a lot of query fees. So we can't use this notion of equilibrium to actually compare the query fees rewards, I think.
Yeah, actually, I'm totally agree with 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗧's points, and this second part especially, because I'm pretty sure that we need at least 4 indexers per each subgraph, because some kind of one of them can have some problem, two of them can have some problem, but if you'll have at least 4, it will be more guaranteed for queries that it will be served like a right way. So I'm totally agree with it. I just was like a little bit against the second points about jumping and equilibrium. It's bad. So yeah, and right now, as I can see, we don't have any examples where we have any of subgraphs where we have only one indexer, and it is a large indexer.
Could I just? I just had a thought that's. I wouldn't say it's. I like Slim's idea. I just want to make that clear. But playing devil's advocate, I wonder. I'm not sure if this is something Konstantin was thinking of as well. Is whether, in some ways, depending on the implementation of the numbers, of course, whether capping the amounts a single indexer can allocate to a subgraph, are you not then potentially, in some cases, stepping in front of curation and the open market in determining how valuable that subgraph is to index? Whether it deserves multiple indexes. I know obviously we want resilience and redundancy in the network, but I don't know, just one kind of challenging thought possibly on that topic.
Could you play that through a bit more, Gary?
Well, let's say you have a small new subgraph that launches and somebody, big or small, sees that there's potential rewards profit there. And again, like Joseph was saying, we're kind of going off rewards when really we want to incentivize queries, but we have to work with what we've got. So say somebody jumps on that, big or small, knocks it to equilibrium, and then nobody else wants to allocate to it. Wouldn't the natural course of things to be, if the developer or whoever wanted that to incentivize more people to index that, would be to increase their stake? It's possible that the same person might again just allocate more delegation to that, but I don't know, just a thought.
Increase their signal, you mean?
Yeah, signal, sorry.
Yeah, yes, but I think that is true today. The difference is that today the kind of lossiness of that additional signal in achieving additional indexers is a lot higher than it would be if the protocol, required additional indexes to come on and created incentives to do so, because obviously, a single or a small number of indexes couldn't saturate the kind of amount of allocation required to bring the yield down to equilibrium. So you just create incentives for more indexes, a diverse set of indexes to come in to do so. So I think that's true today, but the mechanism isn't as strong at driving that outcome.
Yeah, just a passing thought I had from something Konstantin was saying about the perception of bad versus good outcomes.
Yeah, I guess, and this is something really beneficial to have multiple indexers on the same subgraph. But I think right now in the conversation, what was a bit confusion is that we're comparing the indexing equilibrium with query fees. But let's say that once these subgraphs are generating a lot of query fees, then it's true that from an indexing perspective, as a small indexer, you might not be really incentivized to jump on a subgraph and have a lower profitability. But from a query fees perspective, it could be actually incentivized. And as large indexers, at some point when query fees start playing, you would have you would want to allocate to more subgraphs in a certain way that you're allocating to the same amount of your work. So it will de-incentivize having large amount of allocation to a small number of subgraphs. Yeah. So that's why, once the query fees start playing, these mechanisms start gonna change.
I think there might be some edge cases where, if we are limiting, in general, I like the idea of limiting how much a single indexer can capture from a single subgraph, but there might be some edge cases where, if the signal is low for whatever reason, that it's totally uneconomical and not even one single indexer will start to pick it up. Among other reasons, because of the gas cost, we need to pay every open and every close. Say if you can only have your 25% of whatever is on that can be earned on that subgraph, and the signal is super low, why would any indexer still want to do it? So trying to put a maximum on allocations without having a minimum on signal can potentially lead to tricky situations.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
so-
kind of where I was going with my other thought, is that it could possibly exacerbate some edge cases, I guess.
I discussed this with Quiz earlier as well, and he pointed out that we could start with a much higher allocation just to include it in the network. And once indexing moves to a layer 2, we can slowly decrease that cap, or decrease it to a more sensible, that makes sense also with the amount of subgraphs that will be on the network at that point.
I also think
it's
the other
worth...
problem is that in general, I'm more a fan of putting in a maximum amount. But for example, the maximum amount for a Uniswap could be super different for the maximum amount of whatever random small subgraph we have. And in general, the caps need to be high enough to warrant the gas costs. If I'm allocating, I'm looking at making allocations of minimum $500,000 GRT, because otherwise it doesn't make any kind of sense. The gas cost is brutal. But at the same time, if you look at Uniswap and SushiSwap, those could potentially do with a lot higher maximum allocations, because they expect the traffic is going to be higher, and the present signal is also a lot higher. So I think we really need to think this through in all of the different scenarios and edge cases that could potentially happen.
It's definitely worth disambiguating between the two proposals. Personally, I don't think that the second proposal, which would be to cap the amount of rewards that an indexer could receive, I don't think that version makes a lot of sense. I think that capping the allocation size itself makes a lot more sense. And even if you were the single indexer, making your kind of maximum allocation size, you would still receive 100% of the rewards. So it's not like capping the allocation size limits your ability to kind of extract indexing rewards from an allocation.
I am interested to know, how are you guys gonna find out this kind of cap limit, like the maximum allocation? And the second question, does the max cap take into consideration possible query?
I wanted to point out that no one really took into account what Brandon said earlier, that in a way we only introduce incentive to split big indexers so that we can have like 4 smaller ones. Like 25% is pretty big still. So yeah, we only produce syllables maybe this way, because like a big indexer basically has to split itself into small ones.
I mean,
and maybe another point to see, another way to view it is that we could actually incentivize very small indexers to jump on subgraphs that have big indexers in them, by maybe like give them a few percentage points more share of the indexing rewards than they actually share of the stake, or something like this. It doesn't hurt the big indexer much, but it might be the thing that pays the gas cost for the small indexer.
I think something like that has far more potential to encourage Sybil behavior than what we are talking about. I think like an interesting property of this proposal is that to some extent it kind of levels the playing field between very large indexes that choose to kind of keep all of their stake within a single indexer, or Sybil across 100, because it effectively means for any given amount of stake there is roughly a fixed number or a minimum number of allocations that must be made against the network. And that is true whether you have all your stake in one indexer or whether you have it spread across 100. The cost profile is the same.
I feel like the Sybil's, there's always going to be a kind of spectrum on how incentivized people are to Sybil or not. And I feel as long as we're pushing in the right direction with some common sense, that's the best you can hope for, because you can even make arguments in the opposite direction that, say an indexer splits and he's going to allocate twice to the same subgraph, that the hypothetical one we're talking about. Who says he would? Why wouldn't he spread his risk amongst other subgraphs? That subgraphs could fail, and if he allocates twice the weight, he loses that allocation on both nodes. You can make the argument in both directions.
Slim, did you consider dynamic proportions depending on something like total allocation to a subgraph or total signal?
I didn't mention it in the post, but yeah, absolutely, that's something that is in the solution room as well. My intention was simply that small subgraphs still have multiple indexers, and that the larger subgraphs there are a larger amount of indexers, and also to incentivize larger indexers to put more work into the network.
Yeah. Okay. We have Sorry, who's that? Go ahead.
Sorry, that ETH was. I had a small question that maybe somebody could help with on the Sybil stuff. Do we have any kind of reasonable expectation on if there would be some kind of maximum, just from a feasibility perspective, on how many indexers can be ran at once? I mean, I know that there's the possibility to design complex automation, which should obviously be available to somebody with the resources of one large indexer operation, but it seems difficult that there would be an operation that could scale and manage, say, 1,000 indexing operations at once. So there's probably a number in there that suddenly becomes too big of scale to handle. And obviously we should plan for kind of that worst case scenario of wondering if an indexer could scale out to 1,000 indexers or something, some kind of distributed architecture. But does anybody have any concerns around whether or not there would just be some kind of natural limit that would eventually be hit where we don't necessarily have to worry about Sybils, because it would just be too much overhead and time to handle that?
I would suspect that it's the opposite. I'd suspect that the thing we're going to have to fight against as the protocol matures is sort of the economies of scale, or the returns to scale of these types of activities. So I mean, this is what has kind of determined the status quo of like Web 2, right? You end up with these big kind of winner take all markets, and the things we need to do are make sure that both the protocol economics are such that we're not, if we can't formalize a way to at least penalize winner take all dynamics, we certainly don't want to reward it either. We want to make sure that we have rules that are sort of Sybil invariant, or stake scale invariant. But then also just democratizing the tooling and the products and the learning and the know-how, I think, will be a huge factor, right? So we don't want to silo learning in such a way that rewards these sort of winner-take-all dynamics. And even some of the grant work with teams like Semiotics around developing learning agents so that indexers can run and automate their setup more effectively, serves that end as well.
Okay, we have 10 minutes left. I want to give Brandon an opportunity to present his piece on changes around POI submission. So Brandon, do you want to maybe give us an overview, and then we can go into comments on that?
Sure, yeah, I shouldn't need the full 10 minutes, but basically it's just a call for feedback on a proposal in the forums around requiring that more recent POIs are submitted in order to collect indexing rewards. So this is actually in reference to the incident I mentioned with synthetics from a few weeks ago, where all the indexers that were allocated in collecting indexing rewards were, some threshold of, blocks behind the chain head. There were other indexers that were fully synced to the chain head, but they didn't have an incentive to actually, come in and allocate, because the sort of yield was already at equilibrium. So in this case, for this specific type of incident, we're proposing that in order to collect rewards, there'd be some default window that, or default threshold that you need to be within that range of the chain head for it to collect rewards. There's a couple different ways we could approach this. The sort of simpler way is at the arbitration charter layer. So basically it would become a slashable offense to submit a POI that's like outside the window. Obviously the risk with that is that right now there's no way to force your close allocation transaction to revert if it gets mined, for example, later than you expected. So you'd want to make some changes at the contracts layer to make that actually a safe mechanism for indexers to interact with. The other way to try and approach this is actually enforce that the POI is fresh at the contract layer by requiring indexers to submit the block hash that corresponds to that POI, and then actually reject the transaction if the block hash isn't within the allowed threshold. The major limitation here is that, as far as we can tell so far, Solidity only makes the 256 most recent block hashes available, which is about an hour's worth of blocks. So we'd have to figure out a way to either make that window work for us, which and probably for most subgraphs it does, or figure out a way to like cache more information on chain that we can use to look at older blocks. There's also a lot more new gas costs that are introduced, if you kind of go this approach of checking against those known recent block hashes. The major things I'd love to get feedback from indexers on, are what a sufficiently large window would be, like a sufficiently large threshold to be achievable from the perspective of the indexing community, but also, small to be useful for most subgraphs and dApp developers today, which are sort of relying on the graph for more real-time data. In the future, an extension to this mechanism might be to allow this to be specified by the subgraph developer, either in the manifest or maybe when they deploy it on chain, to support more subgraphs that are focused on historical or analytics use cases. So that's kind of the short view of the proposal.
Brandon, I'm kind of confused on what this is trying to achieve, basically. But because like if you force indexers to close allocations with POIs up to chainhead, you're only reducing the time from 24 hours of like we now have to submit basically within the same epoch with the POI pointing at the start block. You're only reducing that to at most 24 hours of recent data, only to close the allocation. But you can still stay without, like you can just open an allocation, wait for like 20 days, and then quickly sync that subgraph, close the allocation, and then you can get away with it. I'm just trying to figure out what's the, you get what I mean?
Yeah, it's a fair point that the fact that you're caught up to the chain head at the time that you close doesn't guarantee that you were caught up to the chain head the entire time. I think to really get the benefits of that, we'll have to have L2 scaling, which we talked a little bit about in the core dev call this morning. It's definitely a big priority that I think just makes every aspect of the protocol better, one of which is the ability to reduce the duration of epochs or the duration of allocations. Nonetheless, like it at least guarantees that like you have the fact that you were caught up to the chain head at the time that you submitted the POI and closed the allocation, at least rules out an entire class of behaviors of indexers that are either perpetually behind the chain head or never actually able to catch up to the chain head, collecting indexing rewards on the subgraph, which seems to have been the case in the synthetics effectively outage, a couple weeks ago, where it was indexers that were perpetually behind the chain head were monopolizing indexing rewards for that particular subgraph.
It's not totally true, but another point, what we just can't start paying any rewards to the indexers who didn't fully sync the subgraph. Because for now, we have off-chain sync possibility, and it's like a proper behavior from the indexer side. But everybody can just jump in and start doing like you described before. If we will stop rewarding this kind of behavior, it will solve all problems without any like windows or something like that.
could you be required to have a valid POI when you open an allocation? Because you can sync the subgraph of what's it called? Yeah,
Off-chain.
you can off-chain before opening the allocation.
Yeah, this is a really interesting idea that I can't remember if it was you that brought it up in another one of our conversations or someone else I spoke to. Philosophically, the reason we don't have that now is that the indexer is still doing work prior to being caught up to the chain head, right? And like there is a risk that like if they were never allowed to collect indexing rewards, they could essentially get like rug pulled by curators and never get rewarded for that work. In theory, that could happen to some degree anyway, so it's not something that's fully mitigated. The bigger reason for not maybe not jumping on that right now is that would be that would be a deeper change to how the protocol works than simply the proposal that I posted in the forums, which is to extend the close allocation function with another 1 to 2 parameters.
Can I describe a problem that we have right now and with synthetics in the same time? When I think it was not synthetics, it was a sushi swap, and there was a lot of signals like 1 million or half of million, something like that. So we have like 2 options. One of them we started syncing it off-chain, and it was a good choice. But after several days, we understood that a lot of indexers just jump in without fully synced subgraph. And if we will choose not starting syncing it on-chain, we will have a chance to lose some delegators because our API will decrease. And it's some kind of incentivizing to jump in to the really long waiting syncing subgraphs without any without any help to the system to work to serving queries. In the same way, if you work with all subgraphs and you off-chain syncing any new subgraphs, you will start allocate only after you finish your off-chain sync and start getting queries, start getting rewards for indexing. I think it's totally like honest behavior without any doubts. I can describe it on the forum like
just to clarify. Just to clarify, I want to make sure I understood your takeaway, which is that you think being able to collect indexing rewards while indexing up to the chain head is good behavior. Was that the main takeaway?
I think if we will not get any rewards before we fully synced it off chain and starting to sync it on chain, I think we don't need to get any rewards before that for this subgraph. We can keep indexing all other subgraphs, and when something new appears, we can just start to indexing it off-chain, and only when we finish it, we will open allocations and start getting rewards. And I think this behavior will be fully healthy.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, part of what you were describing, which I agree with, was kind of this, the fact that indexers sort of have a free option in the time that it takes them to index that subgraph for the first time. They allocate and they're theoretically accumulating rewards, and they can really decide at any point whether they want to, make good on that and invest the resources to get caught up and sort of, engage in proper indexing behavior. So yeah, I'm definitely open to that change. I think it's not entirely orthogonal to this. I think it's something that could be layered on top, but I would love to see a proposal maybe from 𝗨𝘀𝗲 or someone else on exploring that.
Okay, guys, we're a couple of minutes over. Thanks everybody for contributing today, and we will see you again on office hours next week. Bye.